you were just doing it just to do it, essentially. So, people they, for example, someone who says they want to lose weight. Now, the reason why the why is important is because if they're just losing weight because of somebody else, or they don't know why they use, people say it's healthy, but that, it being healthy is not a good enough why for that person. You know, when some people who, let's say they may be overweight, and then they get to a point where it's like, oh, the doctor says like you've had one heart attack, you finna have a stroke and stuff like that. Then they're like, okay, that's a good enough why. I might die. Or for some people, like let me continue with the weight one, whereby they'll say your weight is probably what's preventing you from becoming pregnant. So then that why is good enough. So whenever you're doing stuff, and you're setting goals, you need to understand why you're doing this. Because if you don't know why, when the days that become tough, you will just you'll be like, what's the point? You'll be like, why am I even doing this? And if you don't have your why ready at hand, then you'll probably flop, essentially. So your why is one of those things where it will help sustain your motivation for you to achieve the goals that you're trying to do. So, like we said, obviously with goals, there's an ultimate goal or desire that you want to achieve, whether that's, no matter how big or small. You break that down into a, little goals that are things that you need to do or steps you need to do to achieve that. So I want to lose weight. My goal is to go to the gym once a week. My goal is to start, maybe do cardio, 1K. My goal is to carry, 10 kg, 20 kg, whatever it may be. The milestones will be the results of that. Okay, cool. I've lost 5 kg. I've lost 1 kg. I've lost 10 kg. And then when it comes to the why, that comes down to your motivation about you actually achieving those goals. Now, the next, when it comes into goals, like obviously everyone has probably heard about SMART goals. And obviously the SMART goals are kind of self-explanatory. It has to be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. And so the reason for that is that obviously specific. So obviously sometimes people will say, okay, like for example, a good one that I do with people is that somebody will tell me, okay, they don't want to be rich, they want to be comfortable. And so that's a common one I always hear people say, I don't want to be rich, I just want to be comfortable. Okay, I'd be like, that's your goal, you just want to be comfortable. Okay, what does comfortable look like? What is comfortable? Because if you can have 100K, you can be comfortable at 20K, you be comfortable at 100K. It just depends. So you need to be specific with what your goal is. The second thing, obviously, is measurable, because if you have a goal and you're not really measuring it, then you don't know if you're making any progress. So we all know the saying of, and nothing measured, nothing managed. So again, I find that for example, if I go back to finances to some extent, is that some people feel that they are terrible with money. They're completely terrible with money. They have no acumen for money or how to handle it. And for most times when people think that they're bad at something, they're not really as bad as they think they are. It's just they never took the time to actually measure what they're doing, or actually see that they've been making progress. Next one is attainable. Like the goal you're trying to achieve, can you even achieve it? Is it even attainable? Like, and again, it being attainable and then it being realistic, or essentially for some people say realistic, some people will say relevant. Essentially, is it relevant to what you're doing? Like, is it relevant to this goal itself? Is it relevant to your ultimate goal? Is it realistic? Can you actually achieve it? And again, time bound. So can you achieve it in a reasonable time? But not only that, a reasonable time, but it has to have a deadline. If there's no deadline, then not necessarily the deadline, but there has to be um times in which this can be achieved. And when you ask yourself the question, so for example, somebody will tell me today, I've had this in real life, somebody will tell me like, oh, I want to buy a house by the end of next year. Okay, cool. How much have you saved? I've done 1K, so you want to buy by the end of next year? Yeah, but do you know how much it is? No, but whatever it is, so they don't know the specific amount. They've not measured. They don't even know how much they're saving. Is it attainable? I mean, to be the answer is just no. It wasn't attainable. Was it realistic? No. Was it relevant? No. And so, what the goal of what they were trying to achieve within the time they gave themselves was not there. And so, when it comes down to it, you should understand that it's okay if after you have this goal and you break it down for you to push the time frame of what your goal is. Like, some people get anxiety and they kind of say, oh no, I said I have to do it by then. Again, you need to be able to chill and understand what is actually achievable, attainable at the time you have. Now, everybody knows about SMART goals, but then there's a way to make it smarter, which is another at the ER, which is to evaluate and reward. So your goals are only as good as you use them and as you reflect on them. Similar to your milestones, similar to all those things, it's good to evaluate your goals and also check whether your goals are actually working for you, where these goals actually make sense, and whether you're going and making steps to achieve it. And then the last one, which a lot of us forget, is to reward ourselves after achieving our goals or achieving our milestones. So that is a case of which, if there's if you, for example, for me, I'll do all this budgeting, but maybe once a month, I'll give myself like a little 10, 20 pounds, a little 5K self-date kind of thing going on, get that milkshake, and you can reward yourself when you achieve these goals, because obviously for example, when it comes to like gym, for example, people really go very hard. They'll go on vegan diet, they'll go on keto diet 3 months straight, and they've hit some milestones, but they never gave themselves any kind of sense of reward. So after a while, they will lose motivation and feel like they've been punishing themselves. It's almost like I've been stressed out all this time. Now I need to reward myself, and then they go ham, they go mad, they go crazy. They really revert back from where they were to where they were prior to actually doing that, because it's that's how people because they have not rewarded themselves along the way, they go from one extreme to another, and they keep jumping from extreme to another. And then, now it's winter body, now it's summer body, now it's winter body, now it's summer body. It's just a cycle. So it's hard to keep it consistent if you're not rewarding yourself and somewhat self-validating yourself for the work that you're doing. Because a lot of times we don't pat ourselves on the back for the goals that we're trying to achieve, especially when you're trying to achieve those goals. Now, so that's SMART goals. So again, you need to make it specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound. So there's no problem with setting a deadline, and it's scary sometimes to set a deadline. And to take a step further for these things is for you to write them down. So if you're gonna have a SMART goal, write them down. And write's not type. You can write it then type it, one of the two. But I like writing just because it registers into your brain cognitively more if you actually write it down, because your brain, almost like muscle memory, kind of like is as you're writing, kind of remembers with you, as opposed to typing when it's kind of generic. It's just tapping. It doesn't really register that. And again, evaluate the goals. Don't just make it smart, but make it smarter. So whatever the goal is, it doesn't matter what the goal is, there's a way to break it down for you to get yourself going. Because especially this is also good in telling us to chill a little bit. It's like, for example, I'm in my new job at work, and then it's like I've got this huge system that I'm supposed to be managing and working on. And then, in the beginning, so much energy, I'm like, I want to do all of this. How do I do this? And then at some point, me and my manager, we had to be like, okay, let's slow down. How can we do this so that you don't end up burning out? How do you do this so that you end up retaining the information? You don't just go on blind zeal and small motivation to come and, flop yourself out. So that's smarter. So that's a smarter framework of goals. Now there's a second type of goal, which you still use the smarter aspect in it, but it's one where, especially if you want to do something you've never done before, it's just called a stretch goal, basically, a goal that will stretch you. Because ultimately, when it comes to a lot of things that we want to do in our life, like not a lot of growth happens within your comfort zone. And so, or majority of the growth that you ever have is going to be outside of your comfort zone. And if you don't push yourself outside your comfort zone, then life will come and do you backhand and give you struggle, and then you have to get out of your comfort zone some way. So sometimes we need to set stretch goals where it's like it seems so unattainable, but it's big enough to also even give us like more motivation to try and achieve it. So it's almost that idea of that, somebody will say, what's that thing? People say shoot for the moon, because even if you miss, at least you hit the sky or something like that. So there's goals in that sense where they're very lofty, but and it's different from the SMART goals, because especially with stretch goals, they're not necessarily they're not necessarily at your current stage fully realistic to you, maybe not fully attainable to you, but then it's the question of how much work you're going to put into actually overcome maybe your weaknesses or whatever to come up to that. But then when it comes to stretch goals, there's a different way of going about it, which you incorporate SMART, but then you also have to incorporate basically asking for help in terms of achieving your goals. And your stretch also relies heavily more on vision than it is on goal, because it's more of how you want to see the world, or how you want to see your environment, or how you want to see where you're at. Now, in what might stretch you might be something that is attainable for somebody else, but it's a stretch for you. So you need to incorporate that into all of that. Now, one that I kind of came up with this, but it's a way to illustrate when people are actually thinking about their goals, and it's understanding what type of goal it actually is. So there's loads of different kinds of ones that I kind of envisioned when I was talking about goals, but then whether it's linear, horizontal, exponential, quadratic, and there's other ones depending on what you're doing, but it's very good to understand what type of goal you actually have, so that you can understand how you actually plan it out. So on the left, you have a quadratic graph, so it's just like a downward loop. On the right, exponential, a linear graph, and a horizontal. Now, to break down the differences in these kind of ones, it's like, for example, if you're in the gym, it would be, if you're trying to lose weight, or if you're trying to get faster, it would likely be an exponential to some extent. Depending on what you're doing, it'll probably be exponential. So we all know, even in terms of like energy, we all know the hardest part to do is to start. So in the beginning, even to go jogging, it's like, oh my days, I can't jog. And then before you know, you start, you go from 2K to 4K to 5K. It's not necessarily linear. Even losing weight in the beginning, people who are losing weight in the first couple of weeks, months, you don't really see much difference. Like, it's only going like a 1 kg, 0.5 kg, a couple of pounds here or there, and then before you know it, it's in the last stretch that you start seeing the biggest change. And so that is the exponential type of goal, whereby everything ramps up more to the end, but you still have to go through this process. So even if you look at businesses, for example, most startups are like this. In the beginning, they're not getting no traction. But when they start, proof of concept, and then they start getting their first deal, then before you know it, boom, that's how they go. You see Teslas, you see a lot of startups, that's how they go. Now, this one, on the left, a quadratic one, it would be maybe like, if, for example, if you were a footballer and your goal was to get match ready. Now, if you're going to go for match ready, what would probably happen is that in the beginning, you start ramping up the intensity. You start from rest, get up, increase it 10 kg, 50 kg, 100 kg in the gym, whatever, be doing the sprints, and then it reaches maybe a day. Let's say you have 5 days before your match. On the third day would be the biggest one, which would be your peak, and this is what would be, and then you would start ramping down so that you don't burn yourself out and conserve your energy for match day. So that's how they would do it on that. Now, the one on the bottom left here, horizontal, is the one where it's equal measure at all the time. Is equal measure. So for example, people do this typically when they're studying for the exams. It's like, okay, cool, I've got 4 weeks left to exams. I've got a big exam there. If I break down this course, I've got like 20 chapters of this course, and it will take me 3 hours to do each of them. I do maybe 1 hour a day, or 2 hours a day, 3 hours a day. So typically this is how people actually do their when they're trying to revise this, how they break up their goals. Okay, 3 hours a day, 3 hours a day, 3 hours a day. Okay, I've done this 3 hours a day. Even when people are trying to do their work for uni and stuff like that, they do it as well that way. Now, this one, obviously, linear, self-explanatory. As you just go on, you kind of increase in proportion as you're going on, and it almost goes on a straight line. And so, depending on how your goal is, will come down into how you actually effectively plan it. So for some people, they're like, okay, I'm gonna do, even in terms of like doing weights or stuff like that, or doing press ups, it's like, you go from doing 2 a day, 2 a day, 2 a day to like, okay, 3 a day. But then after you realize that if you can do 3 a day for like a month, then you can very easily go to like 7 a day, 10 a day, as opposed to, just adding one every day. It doesn't really work that way. So depending on your goal will depend on how you actually effectively plan it. So understanding your goal, or what type of goal you actually have, is very important for you to succeed in doing that. Now, the next thing when it comes to your goal is doing something called a SWOT analysis. So a SWOT analysis, I didn't put this up here, but is basically it's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now, I typically tell people to kind of have it either do it twice or do it in a combined fashion. So typically what people would do is that they would actually they would actually just get a piece of paper. I didn't draw it here. Get a piece of paper, divide it into 4. They'll have strengths here, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now, what you need to understand is in this, you can do it in that people will do this multiple times across the life cycle of them getting their goals. But essentially, the two things you need to be looking at is this SWOT analysis is one for yourself. So what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What is the opportunities that you have? And what are your threats? Now, why I said it is 2 is because you want to do one for the actual plan, the goal itself, like, okay, and kind of combine it. So you can do, some people do it separately, some people do it on the same sheet of paper, because when it comes to opportunities, it's more within the project or whatever the goal is, as opposed to within yourself. Except if you look at the opportunities for you to either grow, or the opportunities for you to get out of a comfort zone, or opportunities for you to learn something, etc., etc. But understanding your strengths. So what are your strengths? Like, what are your strengths? And your strengths don't have to necessarily be in line with what the goal is, but you need to understand what your strengths are. So the first thing is your strengths. Your second thing is your weaknesses. Like, where you not for me, like, I'll know my strengths is like, okay, maybe public speaking and stuff like that. Working with difficult people, communicating, like that, maybe my strength. Weaknesses, I can sell in person, but maybe marketing online marketing is not my strength. So there's a weakness there. What is opportunities within your goal, or whatever thing you're trying to achieve? Is there opportunities that you can exploit outside? Is there opportunities that you can have from doing this? And then what are your threats? Now, the strengths and the threats part is more, again, very, what's the threats within this, but especially self-evaluation. Okay, cool. I want to go gym a lot, but my threat of that is, like I've said, I want to go gym every 6 a.m., but the threat to it is that I go to bed late a lot. So I'm likely not to go achieve that. My threat is that I like to procrastinate, so I'm probably not going to hit the time bound. My threat is, I have FOMO. So if I'm supposed to get this done by tomorrow, but my boy or my friend or whatever, my girl tells me I need to come out, then I'll be out in 2 minutes. So what are the threats within myself that I can identify that will actually hold me back from achieving my goal? And what's the threats within this? Like, is it, for example, let me say you're trying to be a rapper or singer. A threat to it could be you have what's it called? An engineer or producer who doesn't know what they're doing, and XYZ. So next thing you'd want to do is a SWOT analysis on yourself and your plan. The next part is essentially, what are your resources? Now, a lot of people sometimes tell me the reason why they haven't started, or they haven't gotten the idea off the ground, or X, Y, Z, is like, is because they don't have the resources. Hugo, there's no resources. I don't have the resources to get what I want to get done. Which, it's not really true. It's not really true. It's not that you don't have the resources. It's not that you don't have the resources that you think you should have, essentially. But then when it comes to this, it's most times it's not that you don't have the resources, you're just not resourceful enough. It's about being resourceful to what you have. So, regardless of what you do want or do, obviously, again, this may take you out of your comfort zone. For example, some people, they don't like asking for help. Some people are too prideful. Some people, they don't know how to communicate. They don't know what to look for, where to look for stuff. But what resources that you actually have available, because everybody has some kind of resources available. So for example, you want to become want to do music and rap, but you don't have money for what's called to pay producers and pay studio time. A lot of youth clubs actually have that facility for free. You're trying to find jobs, you can't really know, you're trying to do your CV or something like that. If you go to a library, depending on where you live, there's always a library, at least one library in every borough. Again, with all these things, okay, you don't have money to start, there's free websites, there's free platforms. Like, what have you done the research to find the resources? Okay, you don't really have money. Have you thought about, asking your mom, asking your dad? Don't just ask them in the case of, give me money. Go to them with a business plan, kind of like, this is what I want to do. Because ultimately, again, if you go to the beginning, if you don't know why you're doing it, then ultimately you can't communicate to anybody what you're trying to do if you've not communicated to yourself. So when it comes to finding resources, regardless of what your plan is or what you're trying to achieve, there's a lot of stuff that are actually out there that you can do. And it's all about using what you have before you get to the place where you can get the things where you don't have, like, that's really what it is. So it's like, if you want to start something, 9 times out of 10, don't waste time to start, because when you think you're quote unquote ready, in terms of you have all the resources, you probably wasted a lot of time. Like, you really just wasted a lot of time, and you're actually, behind where you should have been by now. And then what other resources you can also identify that will come to you later, that may not be apparent to you now. So for example, if okay, what resources do I have now? It's okay, I've got youth club, I've got friends, I've got family, I've got the internet, whatever. When I finish GCSE, if I make it to this particular sixth form, then I'll have more resources available, because this one's a music school or whatever, they may give me a camera, whatever. So you need to know what resources you have now, and then as you start moving ahead, more resources will come to you. And so obviously, after you understand what your goal is, what type of goal it is, and I've done an analysis of yourself, where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, and all that kind of stuff. And then also, now you understand what resources you do have available, and ultimately you be evaluating which of these resources actually can help affect my plan. Then obviously the next thing now is to actually create the plan. So it's like, I guess, like I said, a dream without a plan is just a wish. There's nothing. If you don't have a plan, then you're not going anywhere. So if somebody comes to me and tells me they want to do X, Y, and Z, typically I can kind of grasp whether they're going to actually achieve it based on how they communicate what they're trying to do, and whether not necessarily whether they've written down a plan, or whether they're able to communicate to me that they actually have a plan. And the issue isn't about me giving them a thumbs up or whatever. The issue is whether they've given themselves a thumbs up. So if you've ever met somebody who says, I'm gonna do this, you can kind of tell them, like, yeah, I'm gonna do this. It's like, you sure? Like, you can hit them with 2 questions, they've lost motivation, they don't know what they are. But if you understand why what you're doing, then when it comes to creating your plan, then you have now got the full picture, and you've actually self-analyzed yourself. And when it comes into the SWOT analysis, that goes for you, but it also goes for anybody you're working with. So if you're doing the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, you need to know, okay, even if it's your best friend, your brother, your mother, your sister, the person, your boyfriend, your lover, what happens as a threat if you break up with them? What happens if your friendship goes away? What happens if you need it's also like when you're doing a goal and you have other people attached to your goal. It's almost like they say, one of the reasons why people say don't mix business and families, because never hire somebody you can't fire. So if I needed a deadline on Saturday, could I shout at this person? that could be a weakness of me about, communicating constructive criticism or holding people to task. So also when you're doing your SWOT analysis, take into mind, and also for some things, it might not be helped if if one of your friends is in uni with you or at uni and they're helping you out, and you know that in May is exam season, and then you already know that, when you're doing that SWOT analysis, that threat, that for May and June, even April for revision, you might not have this person's full attention. So you need to know who else is, could affect your plan being achieved. So when it comes into you creating your plan, I'll always say that your plan must be adaptable. And that just means that your plan should be ready for life. Because life is just one of them ones that it's going to be, regardless of what your plan is, it's going to throw a spanner in the works, and you need to be able to adapt really quickly. Now, if you're the reason people whose plans aren't really adaptable or aren't ready to adapt their plans, they are hella stressed. They are very what's it called? They're very stressed, anxiety ridden most times. Most times they're fighting. Go on. Your hands up.
Oh, yeah. So where you said for the plan it has to be adaptable and structured in place.
Yeah.
What was I gonna say? Like, for example, me, yeah, I'm trying to at some point in the summer do drop shipping, but I've even been advised that if I'm going to do drop shipping, try and get products for like this particular season. So like summer coming up, because honestly, that's when obviously people are looking into summer products or whatnot, sunglasses, shorts, t-shirts, etc. Yeah, and whatnot. When I'm speaking with suppliers, yeah, so that's what I've done, like here and there. But the only issue is, like, even when I've done it on the Alibaba website, is that I, in particular, don't have my own online business. So would you say that would probably be an issue?
So yeah, they could obviously drop shipping. Obviously, ultimately, it's one of them ones where it's set up to kind of be hands free. You don't necessarily have your own inventory, and so if for example, you're ordering from Alibaba, what do you do if Alibaba's out of stock? What do you do if people aren't necessarily liking that specific one? What do you do if that order doesn't come on time? Do you have other suppliers? And kind of like when it especially with drop shipping, it's like, okay, drop shipping really relies on, like you were saying, like what is kind of hot right now and what do people want right now, because it's all about pushing volume. So especially if you're not going to be doing inventory, is the people you're going to be buying from close by. What do you do if people now get annoyed about the delay in time or whatnot? And so it's about how do you adapt to that situation? How do you kind of adapt, whether that be in terms of customer service, maybe be like, oh yeah, we're experiencing difficulties, or would it be in refunds, or how would you deal with that scenario? Let's say summer comes now. What would you do if people now don't like let's say you put your money into there. Okay, now let's say people don't specifically like this specific sunglasses. What are you going to do? Are you going to remarket it as something else? Are you going to keep on pushing it? Are you going to try and find a new target audience? So how do you change what you've specifically said that, okay, I'm going to definitely get these people, or get this my target audience, or this is my delivery, or this is my supply chain? How do you adapt to that?
Yeah, and I don't know if you've done dropshipping yourself, you go, but from your experience, if someone doesn't have plans to do dropshipping, but they don't have like their own online like business, like shop, like set up on Shopify, then would you say it would be difficult for anyone trying to buy in bulk and then sell it on?
I think if you don't have a platform like Shopify or maybe Etsy or eBay or something like that, it's going to probably be difficult. Or Amazon, it'll probably be difficult if you're trying to do it independent, unless you are close to a market that needs this specifically, or you have a social media presence enough or community enough to do that. So for example, if you're somebody that knows a lot of African aunties and you sell a lot of Ankara or a lot of African material, then you could probably have a network of aunties that are kind of devoid of all of that. They kind of know you. But if you're trying to do something that you're trying to appeal to a wide audience, then having some of these platforms may be beneficial just because of the quick and ease, especially when it comes to like doing stuff like taking payments and stuff like that, as opposed to giving out your details to people to transfer you, which is okay with your friends. But if you're trying to expand beyond that, you may find some hurdles with that. Unless you're already like, if you're bait, if it's like uni things, if you're like in uni and you're bait, then that could work because everyone knows you. But if you're like just out in these streets kind of thing, then it could be difficult.
Yeah, no worries. I'll take that into consideration. I might have to either set up eBay or Shopify, but do you think eBay is better to set something up in terms of like buying things in bulk and then selling them on eBay than compared to Shopify?
Well, me personally, I've never like gone to Shopify to go to Shopify. So I've only gone to Amazon to go to Amazon or eBay. Those are the only two personally that I've gone, and I've gone to Etsy as well. Obviously, a lot of people who, when they do drop shipping, do direct people to Shopify, and I think Shopify, in terms of their market cap, has gone up. So I think people may be actually using Shopify more now than what was before. So, but I wouldn't be able to tell you which one would be the best for like bulk selling, because ultimately I think that still comes down to how you are able to market yourself, to be honest, to get people to be, unless it's something that's hot already and people are searching on it, and then you're ranking on Google and all these kind of things, or in social media, it comes down to just driving traffic. So if it's something that a lot of people want, then you buy in bulk, most platforms you'll be on wouldn't really matter. It's almost like if you had like the new Yeezys, like you could make a fake website, someone will find it. So it just comes down to kind of like the demand of it.
All right, no worries.
Cool. So obviously when you make your plan, it needs to be adaptable. And just to give like another example, for example, people, this one is, a lot of people, for example, that I went to school with, that I know personally, their plan was to get into medicine. And so when they got A-level results, they didn't make it to medicine. Some of them, they didn't change their plan, and so they went into like biomed or something like that, and then finished biomed or something like that. Still applied for medicine. 3 years on, still went and did medicine again, and so they've kind of still chasing. And for some of them, that it's because it's a goal that they made when they were younger or from before, and said, I need to get this, but at no point would it. And then some of them end up getting there 10 years later, but they didn't really understand. They kind of were just doing it because maybe their parents asked them to do or something like that, but their plan wasn't adaptable, because this is what they said, I'm going to do this and I'm going to achieve it. And so we need to be able to be adaptable when like things don't go our way. Let's say I wanted to be a footballer, I could have decided to be continued. I didn't make it in trials, I didn't make it to the team. Obviously, as you go on, at some point you need to change your plan, you need to be adapted. Maybe you might still come to the end, you might still get to the same place in the end, but you may have to take a different route. Then the next thing, obviously, when it comes to your creating a plan, is that it has to have milestones. It has to have milestones for you to be like, okay, cool, I'm actually, when I hit this, I know that I'm making progress. Because when you make a plan, especially if it's the first time you're doing this thing, like I said, if you want to do something, if you want to have something you never had, you need to do things you've never done before. And so if you're doing this, you want to have milestones, because for yourself, it's all about motivation to carry you to the end. So if you don't have milestones for when this is going to, let's say, okay, I've made 5 sales, maybe I've made 10 sales, then it looks like there's progress, because all this work you're putting in now, it's not just that it gives you validation, but it gives you the energy to keep on moving forward. Then the last one of the 3 that I wrote down here was assurance. So within like engineering or facilities management, assurance is just basically, checks and balances to make sure like a project is done well, or to make sure that maintenance is going well, and all those kind of things. So what are the assurances that you're going to put in your plan to make sure that you stay on task, that you stay in there? So for example, like last week I was saying, if you have a budget and you want to do well in finances, it's good for you to have a financial buddy, because that's an assurance for yourself, because now that keeps you accountable. For if you're building like a new building in construction, you would have a supervisor to keep that to essentially be that person to keep you accountable. Cool. So you'd see another person, you need what's it called? You'd have a supervisor who would essentially be that individual who would keep assurance, and so you need to put those assurances within yourself. So for example, obviously if it's like, okay, I want to stop eating a certain amount of sugar, some people's assurances is by cutting out, like no biscuits around the building, no going to the grocery store, they change their route or stuff like that. That's their assurances, because at that moment in time they don't have the self control to not do that. Rules and regulations, all those kind of things. So what do you do for yourself? So for example, for me, I tax myself. So if I flop in a certain aspect, I get taxed. I tax myself, it goes in my savings, but I tax myself if, like, I don't do a certain thing, or I haven't saved this amount, or let me say if I spent too much this week out of my budget, then next week gets hit. So I tax myself for as an assurance for me to stay on track of what I'm trying to do. So I'm trying to save £200 a month, or £50 a month, or 1 million a month. Okay, cool. That means I have to spend only £50 a week here. Let's say I end up spending 75. That means next week I can only do 25. So that you just tax yourself £25 for next week. So what's your assurances? So when you make your plan, you need to understand what type of goal it is, where you're trying to get to, which is the ultimate goal or the desire. That's what you're trying to get to. But then add milestone, and then you need to break down your goal in for it to be achievable. But ultimately, you need to know why you're trying to achieve this big thing. Because if you don't know why you're trying to achieve it, then it's kind of pointless. Because realistically, I always tell people, if you're going to uni, you should know why you're choosing the course you want to choose, regardless of what it is. Because it doesn't matter who you are. Even if you're doing fine art will somehow find its way to stress you. And in those moments when it's stressing you and you want to drop uni and you want to cut, then that's when you need to go back to why you're doing it, and that keeps you going. For example, our parents know why they were working 2 jobs, 3 jobs, because they have to make sure that their kids can eat food. It's not necessarily because they want to. So they know why they're doing what they're doing, and that feeds into their plan, which the ultimate thing is just to raise their kids. And then the goal is just to make this amount of money here or there to make sure that they're comfortable. And so when it comes into when you're creating your plan, it's about understanding what I call as compound goal setting. So understanding how one goal feeds into another and makes the next goal bigger. So, for example, it's about, what's a good example off the top of my head? Essentially, how when you're creating your plan, it's about, a good way to do it is how do you link your goals together. So for example, let me say I'm trying to become a good footballer. Okay, no, let me say table tennis. I'm playing table tennis. I play table tennis. No, let me use basketball. That one's better. So let me say with basketball, my first thing I need to know how to do is, let's say the rules. I learned the rules. That's my goal. Learn the rules. The next thing is to learn how to dribble, to bounce the ball. The next thing I want to know is how to crisscross. Next thing I want to know is how to dribble with both hands. The next thing I want to know is how to jump. And then the compounding effect of each goal being hit makes this next goal even a bit better and easier to achieve. And it makes you all-around package. So for example, let's say you wanted to be a manager, okay, learning communication skills is cool. So you learn communication skills. Now you've learned how to do some timekeeping. Cool. Then you now know how to manage people. Cool. Then you now know how to keep yourself on time. Cool. Then now the goals keep on compounding and compounding. And so there's a way of you creating your plan that it compounds your goals, almost like compound interest, that the end result is almost immaculate. So for example, Robert Greene, the guy who did the book called 48 Laws of Power, I think there was a time in his life where he didn't know what he wanted to do within about the span of 12 years, something years, like 12 years or something like that. He had worked 50 jobs, like 50 odd jobs. He did like fishery to like waitering to, he worked in London, Malaysia, just all these random jobs. And then, but from his little random jobs here and just compounding, that's how kind of like it compounded to the point where he was like, I see how people interact and how human beings interact around power and all these things. And then that's how the book around 48 Laws of Power came about. So that's where the compound goal setting comes into, how you feed into what you're doing to help you get to where you're trying to get to. And so if you feed that into your plan, then it helps to make your plan sustainable, along with you hitting your milestones, and you'll see that your milestones will become greater. And then the last thing I'll mention that I didn't put into here is about when you're setting a plan, especially if it's something that you've not attained before, understanding that, for some of, when it comes into especially evaluating your plan, understanding that, especially if you understand why you're doing what you're doing, what the ultimate goal is, how, especially when it comes to resources, how some of them or some of these things, your answer should just be they will come when they come. So a lot of people wait for resources to come, but most times your resources are coming, waiting for you along the journey to achieve your goal. So it's almost like when you're on the way, it's like, let me say, God, He's got my blessing at Ealing Broadway Station. I need to Kawaka come out of my house, and then once I get past Ealing Broadway Station to get to Central London, that's when that blessing will meet me to help me out. So if you understand how, like, there's nobody's 100% ready or has all the resources before they start the plan, especially in terms of if it's an interpersonal thing or goal we're trying to achieve or business trying to start, you never have all of it. So understanding that that's okay, and that is when you start along the way, as long as you start hitting where you're going, then all you need to know is how to get to the first bus stop. When you get to the first bus, it's like, I can see over the bend. I can see where the next bus stop is, and then you can kind of make your way over there. So that's essentially about goal setting. Obviously, if you, I was gonna ask people if they brought their own some goals they want to achieve. So then I would have done let's give it a go. But obviously, this is kind of the point where if you have any questions or stuff like that, then yeah, you can drop that in.